Every woman carries the wounds of the women before her. The mother who couldn't love herself, the grandmother who sacrificed her dreams, the great-grandmother who was never allowed to dream at all. But what happens when one woman in the lineage says, "Enough"? What happens when she looks at the pattern of abandonment, betrayal, and emotional starvation that runs through her bloodline like poison, and decides she will be the one to break it? Psychology shows us that these pattern breakers don't just heal themselves, they become beacons. They become the women who transform generational curses into generational power. And men can sense this transformation on an unconscious level. They're drawn to her not just as a woman, but as an archetype of healing, of completion, of the feminine divine reclaiming her throne. Tonight, we're diving deep into the psychology of women who turned their deepest wounds into their greatest strengths. Women who took the abandonment that was meant to break them and used it as raw material to build an unshakable empire of self. Because here's what the self-help industry won't tell you. Your daddy issues aren't something to be ashamed of. They're your initiation into a kind of power that well-loved women will never understand. Let's start with something uncomfortable. The girl whose father left, whose mother was emotionally unavailable, whose family taught her that love is conditional, scarce, and dangerous. That girl doesn't grow up to be broken. She grows up to be initiated. Carl Jung talked about the wounded healer archetype, the idea that our deepest wounds become our greatest sources of wisdom and power. But society has convinced us that needing healing makes us damaged goods, that having daddy issues makes us unworthy of love, that abandonment trauma is something to hide, to fix, to apologize for. But here's what psychology actually tells us. The woman who has been abandoned and survived it, who has been rejected and risen from it, who has been emotionally starved and learned to feed herself, she develops psychological muscles that most people never even know exist. Think about your own life for a moment. Think about the moments when you felt most alone, most rejected, most convinced that you were unlovable. Now think about who you became in the aftermath of those moments. Not immediately. Trauma takes time to alchemize into power, but eventually something shifted, didn't it? You realized that if you could survive that, you could survive anything. And in that realization, something untouchable was born. The abandoned girl becomes the woman who cannot be controlled through the threat of abandonment, because she's already lived through the worst-case scenario and discovered she's still here. She's still breathing, she's still powerful. She's still worthy, and that realization, that bone-deep knowledge that she can lose everything and still be whole, makes her absolutely magnetic. Because here's the secret that no one wants to admit. Most people spend their entire lives terrified of being alone. They make decisions from a place of avoiding abandonment. They stay in situations that diminish them because leaving feels like death. They perform and please and pretend because authentic self-expression might risk rejection. But the woman who has already been rejected at the core level, by a parent, by someone whose love was supposed to be unconditional, she's been vaccinated against that particular fear. She knows she can be alone and not die. She knows she can be disliked and still be worthy. She knows she can lose the love of others and still love herself. And that knowledge creates a gravitational pull that's impossible to resist. Here's where it gets really interesting. Psychology research shows us that women who grow up with inadequate parenting often develop what's called earned secure attachment. They literally reparent themselves into wholeness. But this isn't just healing, it's evolution. When you have to become your own mother and your own father, when you have to learn to nurture yourself and protect yourself and guide yourself, you develop a kind of internal strength that people who are well-parented never need to cultivate. You become internally resourced in a way that makes you incredibly attractive to others. Because you're not looking for someone to complete you, you've already completed yourself. Let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed how desperate energy repels people? How needy energy makes others want to run? That's because neediness signals that someone hasn't learned to meet their own needs. It signals that they're looking for someone else to do the job of loving them, that they've never learned to do for themselves. But the woman who raised herself emotionally, who learned to comfort her own tears, validate her own feelings, celebrate her own victories, and pick herself up from her own defeats, she emanates a completely different energy. She emanates completeness, self-sufficiency, the ability to love without attachment because she's not depending on external love for her survival. And here's what's wild. This is exactly what Jung meant when he talked about individuation, the process of becoming whole within yourself. Most people never achieve true individuation because they're too afraid of the loneliness it requires. They choose codependence over self-completion because individuation means facing the void and discovering that you're enough to fill it. But the abandoned girl was forced into that void early. She had to learn to be her own companion, her own validator, her own source of security. And while that was traumatic at the time, it gave her access to a kind of psychological sovereignty that most people spend their whole lives seeking. Think about the women in your life who seem naturally magnetic, the ones who don't chase, don't beg, don't perform for attention. I guarantee you, if you dig deep enough, you'll find that these women learned early how to be alone with themselves without falling apart. They learned that they could be their own best company. And that self-relationship became the foundation for all their other relationships. Now let's talk about something society really doesn't want us to discuss: the power of the woman who has integrated her darkness. The abandoned girl grows up understanding that life is not safe, that love is not guaranteed, that people leave, and instead of spending her life pretending otherwise, she makes peace with those dark truths. She becomes friends with uncertainty, comfortable with solitude, at home in the shadows that terrify other people. This is what I call the dark feminine. Not evil, not manipulative, but powerful in a way that makes people uncomfortable because it can't be controlled through conventional means. You can't threaten to leave a woman who's comfortable being alone. You can't manipulate a woman who's already faced her worst fears. You can't break a woman who's already been broken and reassembled herself stronger. In ancient mythology, the most revered goddesses weren't the sweet, nurturing ones. They were the fierce, untouchable ones. Lilith, who refused to submit. Kali, who danced on destruction. Heki, who ruled the crossroads of life and death. These were women who had integrated their shadow, who had made peace with their darkness, who understood that true power comes from being able to lose everything and still remain standing. The modern woman who has transformed her abandonment trauma into sovereignty carries this same archetypal energy. She's not trying to be likable, she's trying to be authentic. She's not trying to be chosen, she's already chosen herself. She's not trying to be saved, she's become her own savior. And men can sense this on an unconscious level. There's something about a woman who doesn't need anything from you that makes you want to give her everything. There's something about a woman who's complete within herself that makes you want to be part of her completeness. There's something about a woman who's integrated her shadow that makes your own darkness feel less terrifying. But here's what's crucial to understand. This isn't about becoming hard or bitter or closed off. The woman who has alchemized her wounds into wisdom isn't emotionally unavailable, she's emotionally sovereign. She can love deeply without losing herself. She can be vulnerable without being needy. She can be open without being desperate. The difference is that her love comes from overflow, not emptiness. She loves because she chooses to, not because she has to in order to survive. And that kind of love, love given freely rather than desperately, is intoxicating. Here's where this gets even more powerful. When a woman breaks the cycle of abandonment and emotional starvation in her lineage, she doesn't just heal herself, she heals the entire ancestral line. Think about it. Your mother probably carried her mother's wounds. Your grandmother carried her mother's wounds. Generation after generation of women who never learned to love themselves fully, who passed down patterns of seeking external validation, of accepting crumbs of affection, of believing that their worth was determined by their ability to make others comfortable. But when you decide to break that cycle, when you decide that the abandonment stops with you, that the emotional starvation ends with you, that the desperate seeking for love outside yourself dies with you, you don't just change your own life. You change the entire trajectory of your lineage. You become the ancestor your descendants will thank. You become the woman who said no more to generational trauma and yes to generational power. You become living proof that it's possible to transform pain into strength, wounds into wisdom, abandonment into sovereignty. And here's what's wild. When you carry that energy, the energy of the cycle breaker, the pattern interrupter, the generational healer, people can sense it. They can sense that you're not just a woman, you're a force of transformation. You're not just healing yourself, you're healing the collective wound of the feminine that has been passed down for centuries. Men especially can sense this on an unconscious level. There's something about a woman who has healed her ancestral wounds that feels like coming home to a version of the feminine that most people have only dreamed of. Powerful but not dominating, strong but not hardened, independent but not isolated. This is the woman who can hold space for others to heal because she's done her own work. This is the woman who can love without possessing because she possesses herself completely. This is the woman who can be in relationship without losing her identity, because her identity was forged in the fire of solitude. So why are these women so magnetically attractive? What is it about the woman who has transformed her wounds into wisdom that draws people like moths to flame? Psychology gives us several answers. First, there's the phenomenon of earned, secure attachment. When someone creates security for themselves, they emanate an energy of stability that others instinctively seek. They become a safe harbor in a world of emotional storms. Second, there's the power of authenticity. A woman who has faced her darkness and integrated it has nothing left to hide. She's not performing a version of herself to get love. She is herself, fully and completely. An authentic energy is magnetic because it's so rare in a world of masks and personas. Third, there's the allure of the challenge. The woman who doesn't need anything from you presents a different kind of invitation. Not please complete me, but are you worthy of my completeness? She's not asking you to save her, she's inviting you to rise to her level. But here's the deepest truth. The woman who has turned her abandonment into sovereignty carries an energy that heals others. Being in her presence reminds people of their own wholeness. Being chosen by her feels like being chosen by life itself, because she chooses from abundance rather than need. Think about the women who have impacted your life most profoundly. I bet they weren't the ones who needed you the most. They were the ones who saw your potential and challenged you to reach it. They were the ones who loved you not because they needed your love, but because they had love to give. They were the ones who were complete within themselves and therefore had the capacity to enhance your completeness rather than drain it. This is the ultimate paradox of attraction. The more you need someone, the less attractive you become. The more complete you are within yourself, the more others want to share in that completion. So if you're a woman who has been abandoned, rejected, or emotionally starved, if you're a woman who has been forced to parent yourself, protect yourself, and heal yourself, I want you to understand something. You are not damaged goods. You are not broken. You are not too much or too intense or too complicated. You are initiated. You have been through a process that most people spend their whole lives avoiding. You have faced the void and discovered that you are enough to fill it. You have looked abandonment in the face and learned that being alone is not the same as being lonely. You have integrated your shadow and emerged as a whole human being rather than a fragment seeking completion. The wound that was meant to destroy you has become your greatest source of power. The abandonment that was meant to diminish you has taught you sovereignty. The rejection that was meant to make you small has shown you how to be magnificently, unapologetically yourself. Your daddy issues aren't something to be ashamed of. They're your credentials for a kind of psychological mastery that most people will never achieve. Your trust issues aren't a flaw. They're evidence that you've learned to trust yourself above all others. Your independence isn't a defense mechanism, it's a superpower. You are not the girl who was abandoned. You are the woman who rose from that abandonment like a phoenix from ashes. You are not the daughter who wasn't loved properly. You are the goddess who learned to love herself so completely that your very existence becomes an invitation for others to do the same. The throne is yours. The crown fits perfectly. The kingdom of your own heart is vast and beautiful and completely under your dominion. Stop apologizing for your power. Stop dimming your light. Stop making yourself smaller to make others comfortable. You are the pattern breaker, the cycle ender, the generational healer. You are the dark feminine rising. You are untouchable, and that untouchability is exactly what makes you irresistible. Claim your throne, queen. The world is waiting for your reign. If this resonates with your journey of transformation, let me know in the comments what moment marked your shift from abandonment to sovereignty. And subscribe for more deep dives into the psychology of feminine power, because your healing is not just personal, it's revolutionary.